Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us for the virtual book launch of Addie Tsai's Unwieldy Creatures, a biracial, queer, gender swapping retelling of Mary Shelley's classic novel Frankenstein. What a perfect occasion to gather also in celebration of Mary Shelley's 225th birthday. My name is Nicole M. Young Martin, and I am your MC for this evening, coming to you from my home office in Northern Connecticut. One of the things I love about tonight's event is we're cross country. We have people from DC, Texas, Maryland, and Connecticut. So I'm so across different time zones, super excited to get tonight started. Today's event is a collaborative effort being presented by Black Writers Read, BookWoman, and Addie Tsai's literary publicist, Levee Break Lit. I am beyond excited to come together today to celebrate the release of Addie's latest book, which is published by Jaded Ibis Press, a feminist press committed to publishing socially engaged literature with an emphasis on the voices of people of color, people with disabilities, and other historically silenced and culturally marginalized voices. Thank you so much to Lisa Pegram, who is both with Levee Break Lit and Jaded Ibis Press, for bringing us all together for this occasion. I am the founder, producer, and host of Black Writers Read, which is a virtual platform that honors the words, work, and traditions of authors of the African diaspora. A live stream series and audio podcast, Black Writers Read is a behind-the-scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. I love having an opportunity to present, support, and uplift our BIPOC and queer siblings and creatives on this platform, so I am so happy to have been asked to collaborate on Addie's virtual book launch. Our other fellow collaborator for this evening is the feminist independent bookstore BookWoman. Addie Tsai has ties to Texas, which is where they are based. As I learned today, that is Addie's home state. So it's so awesome to have BookWoman here. And also BookWoman hosted a book launch for one of Addie's earlier book. Celebrating 45 years, BookWoman is based on the Tacanwa, Comanche, and Apache land in Austin, Texas. Founded by a collective, BookWoman hosts a myriad of events, including book launches like this one, book groups, and in-person events. Please feel free to visit their website at ebookwoman.com. Joining us this evening is Susan Post, one of the original collective members who has been running and managing BookWoman. She is also the lovely smiling face greeter, cashier, book stalker, event planner, and all-around badass who you'll see every time you go to visit their brick and mortar location. So I'd like to invite Susan to the virtual stage to speak on behalf of BookWoman.
Well, hello. Hi, Nicole. Hi, Tracy. Hi, Addie. I am so happy to be here this evening in this virtual platform. It feels like a wonderful stage for people of color, marginalized voices. It's exactly the same thing that BookWoman has been doing for almost 47 years. So I'm the only original collective member surviving, and I'm so happy to collaborate, to offer the events that Nicole talked about. We have other upcoming events. Many of them are virtual. Many of them are with people of color. So we invite you to check out the website, also our Facebook page. And it's just wonderful that to be invited for Addie's second book launch. We had it in store in the store, and I don't remember, it must have been 4 years ago. It was course, pre-pandemic, and we don't remember that time very well, but we do remember Addie. And Nicole and Tracy and I chatted on Sunday to get to know each other, and I'm big fans of both of them. And what can I say? I'm so happy to be here. And y'all buy a book or buy two. And you can go to ebookwoman.com. Addie's book is there by typing in Addie's name, or you can go to the event and there's a link right to the site where you can purchase her book or their book, and support your local feminist bookstore. And I know we're in Austin, but we're still local. We're local to you because we're talking to you. And
hey, please, if you can, please purchase the book.
Yeah.
BookWoman. When we met on Saturday virtually, we met while the store was open, and we had a chance to talk to some of the patrons. And it just felt like, even though I haven't been there yet because I haven't been west of Chicago, it just feels like it's just such a very supportive sibling-based atmosphere. And Susan, thank you so much for holding space in that way.
Well, it's in a way, it's a performance space, and we're all actors in the space, and sometimes there's some really good scenes, and I think you were part of one, so thank you for joining in.
Yay, thank you so much. Let's go ahead and get more started. So I have the opportunity to introduce my co-host for this evening. So for many of you who have been devout followers of Black Writers Read, you will recognize this name and face. Tracy Cross, horror writer. She was featured on episode 4 of season 2 of Black Writers Read, and also today on the audio podcast, her episode is the retrospective. So please be sure to check it out. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and Spotify. So I'm looking at the wrong script, y'all. I'm like, wait a minute, hold up, what am I doing? To introduce Tracy properly, I'm a little kind of that today. So I was looking at the wrong script. My apologies. So to get us started, I am going to invite Tracy to join me. I'm sorry, kind of off today. Here we go. I wanted to share with you a little bit about Tracy before I bring her on this evening. And I can't seem to find, there we go. This is what we like to call producing on the fly. I am finding things here. So here we go. Tracy Cross's work has been featured, and I want to make sure because she's done a lot since she was last on Black Writers Read. Tracy Cross's work has been featured in several podcasts, including Nighty Night with Rabia Chaudhry, advocate and author of the New York Times bestselling book, Atna's Story. Her work can be found in several anthologies, including Don't Break the Oath, Pandemics Unleashed, and 99 Tiny Terrors. Her first book, Rootwork, a folk horror homage to her late grandmother, will be published in the fall of 2022 by Dark Heart Books. Tracy has been the recipient of the Horror Writers Association Scholarship from Hell in 2022, a grant from the Ladies of Horror Fiction, the 2019 New Voices Fellowship from the Emerging Writers Festival, and participated in a residency with Under the Volcano in Mexico. She lives in Washington, D.C., and is an active member of the HWA and is a huge Prince fan. She loves disco and shares her latest exploits and information on her blog, tracycwritesonline.com. Please join me in welcoming Tracy to the virtual stage.
Hey.
Hello.
I'm back. So
yay!
I didn't offend too bad. It is so good to see you.
Good to see you too. And thanks for the patience as I was trying to bring you on.
People want me to be all extra goth and dark because I'm a horror writer. So I wore black.
Yeah.
So I'm good, devil naked moon worshiping will probably happen next week, but this week today, people, I think the darkest thing I have is my lipstick, so I'm pretty excited to be here though.
Yes, you're not gonna do it.
See you again, Nicole. We had such a great time last time, and I'm looking forward to a really awesome time tonight.
Yay! I had so much fun the last time. And so speaking of which, we have one more introduction to do. We need to introduce our guest for the evening. I'd like to introduce Addie Tsai. Addie Tsai is a queer, non-binary artist and writer of color who teaches courses in literature, creative writing, dance, and humanities. They are currently a lecturer of creative writing at the College of William and Mary. They taught in Goddard College's MFA program in Interdisciplinary Arts and Regis University's Mile High MFA program in creative writing. Addie collaborated with Dominic Walsh Dance Theater on Victor Frankenstein and Camille Claudel, among others. They hold an MFA from Warren Wilson College and a PhD in dance from Texas Women's University. Addie is the author of the young adult novel Dear Twin, which was read and premiered at BookWoman. Their writing has been published in Foglifter, Vita Lit, Benango Street, The Offering, The Collages, The Feminist Wire, Nat, Brute, and elsewhere. Addie is the assistant fiction editor of Anomaly, associate editor at Raising Mothers, and founding editor and editor-in-chief at Just Femme and Dandy. You can find Andy online at andytsai.com. Tonight, they'll be reading excerpts from the recently released book, Unwieldy Creatures. I am so excited to bring Addie to the virtual stage. Hello.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yay. So we would love for you to read your work. So Tracy and I are going to skedaddle off and we're going to turn the stage over to you.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to read from pretty early in the novel. Unwieldy Creatures is a queer, biracial, Asian, gender-swapped retelling of Frankenstein. So where I'm going to read from you is the narrator, who is an intern at the reproductive science lab that our Frankenstein, who's known as Dr. Frank, founded, started, etc. And at this moment, we find out that something is going on with Dr. Frank, but we're not sure what is going on. So the intern is usually referred to as Plum, which is a nickname that her childhood sweetheart gives her. But in this professional circumstance, she's referred to as Lee, which is her surname. There will be a few moments of Mandarin, but it doesn't really disrupt for you not to know what the Mandarin is. Zhang let me start over. The last night of my summer internship, Dr. Wong, the head of the intern program, and I had to physically restrain Dr. Frank, the owner of FFI, so she wouldn't cause a scene. She's actually the reason I wanted to get into embryo research. I read a book by her I found in the library on a cold night when I was trying to stay out of the streets and keep warm for as long as I could. It was called The Frankenstein Dilemma, A Future Without Men. And the way she interrogated how to do away with the need for sperm entirely was nothing short of miraculous. In fact, no one even knew her given last name. Everyone had been told to call her Dr. Frank because she had been determined, since reading Shelley's masterpiece and cautionary tale, that she would figure out a way to create bodies without sperm. Even without that book, Dr. Frank was at the top of her field, absolutely instrumental in changing how we now think of IVF and embryo sculpting. I was impressed also to learn she was an Asian queer scientist in the southern United States of all places. I would be lying if I didn't admit I hoped to follow in her footsteps. Even though Dr. Frank was well regarded for that book, there was also a lot of controversy surrounding the kind of science she encouraged emerging scientists to explore. Before getting the internship, I went to a talk she gave. During the talkback, an audience member asked what she thought of the ethical dilemma of designer babies. Similar to what animal breeders do, but of course, made much more complex and ethically ambiguous given the science involving human embryos. A smug expression fell across Dr. Frank's face, as though even the question itself bemused her. Dr. Frank cleared her throat before she began, adjusted her pristinely starched men's shirt. Oh, well, yes, of course. There are ethical concerns with what I'm suggesting, but one could say that about the entire field of reproductive science. That's why the conservatives have been trying to cut IVF funding for decades. These are new times, and they require new means of innovation for thinking beyond that to which we've grown accustomed. Men are, it would seem. Finally on their way out, she said with a chuckle, as most of the audience and the moderator laughed alongside her. I looked back at the audience member, who seemed a bit embarrassed, smiling awkwardly as he returned the microphone to its stand in the aisle and made its way to his seat. A middle-aged man, perhaps in his 50s, pierced the room with his voice. "You can't be fucking serious," he yelled. He said more, but it was unintelligible because a security guard had covered his mouth, while another guard grabbed him by the arms and led him out of the room. I wish I had attended with a fellow colleague who might have whispered their reaction in my ear, like so many audience members in the auditorium. Years later, I would think back to the moment of that man's question and realize she never answered him. I wonder what became of that dissenter. I'm sure there are many more where he came from. During the last month of my work at the lab, I saw Dr. Wong gossip with the other techs that had been there far longer than me. The whispers seemed to grow louder, as ones attached to scandal tend to do. I could tell people were alarmed and uncomfortable with what they'd been hearing. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but I heard something about a breakdown and her biggest donors pulling funding. I didn't want my idol to shatter before my eyes, but I couldn't help being curious about what was behind all the whispers. All I knew was something was very clearly wrong with Dr. Frank, and I wasn't altogether sure I wanted to know what it was. And then on the last night of my internship, as we were wrapping up for the night, Dr. Frank blew into the lab like a rash, wild-eyed and pink-faced, her perfectly coiffed hair as frazzled as what seemed to be her state of mind. Her outfit, as always, was elegant and well-tailored. She wore a deep violet suit with a bright green men's shirt. The shirt was untucked, and her thin floral necktie was a bit off kilter, one of the few signs, other than her unkempt hair and complexion, that something was off. Dr. Wong acted fast. She untied her lab apron and threw it to the side. I followed suit. She gestured me to hold down Dr. Frank's right arm while she held her left. Initially, I was a bit caught off guard that Dr. Frank didn't make any move to resist us. Her teeth clacked against one another, and her skin was frigid to the touch and remained so, even after we walked her outside in the blistering southern heat. Not a drop of sweat gathered on her skin. I have to admit, even as I tried to maintain my composure, I was unnerved by her freezing skin, the accelerated speed at which her eyes darted back and forth, like someone on the verge of a mental break. When living on the streets as a runaway teen, you learn a thing or two about how little it takes for people to snap. Whatever was going on, she wasn't well. She kept looking behind her, and I couldn't be sure if she was itching for someone to find her or petrified that they would. I didn't have enough information myself to make any kind of assessment about whether it was rightful suspicion or a paranoid delusion, or both. Dr. Wong gripped her hand as I finished locking up the lab, securing it with the code on the keypad and my thumbprint. We walked her straight to the bathroom in the pub down the street, threw some cold water on her face, and wet her hair. Dr. Wong took both Dr. Frank's hands into hers a bit awkwardly, as it was obvious their relationship hadn't yet earned this kind of intimacy. "Breathe," Dr. Wong commanded, forcefully rubbing her fingers with Dr. Frank's. "But you don't understand. I have to get out of here. It could be any—" Dr. Frank began in a heightened, accelerated tone of voice. "Listen to me," Dr. Wong started, then stopped. She walked over to each of the bathroom stalls, squatted to look underneath to ensure no stall was occupied. "Look, I'm not saying I don't believe you. Everything I've heard, who knows what's true? But whatever you're referring to, it's not going to come in here, that's for sure. And out there, anywhere around the lab, you don't. You know, people are talking. You're already losing donors because of the rumors. No one's going to give their money to a queer woman of color who might be going crazy in the South. You know this more than I do, okay?" Dr. Frank didn't nod, but she didn't interrupt or protest. Dr. Wong continued. "This is what I think we should do. How about you go home with Lee, the intern? She's wonderful, and I guarantee you have her utmost discretion. I'd take you with me, you know, but I have kids and a partner at home. Let's get a bite to eat first, because I think food might calm you down a bit, and also so as not to arouse suspicion. Then Lee will take you to her apartment where you can get some rest, and we can discuss everything else in due time. I doubt whoever is following you will know to look for you there." Dr. Frank's breathing had slightly slowed by this point. She took her hands away from Dr. Wong's and placed her left in her suit coat pocket, as always, while the other smoothed down her wet hair. She nodded. Dr. Wong, very much in charge, led us out of the bathroom. Dr. Wong was right. If she'd stayed in the lab in that state, a tech or a janitor would most likely have reported her. Who knows where she would have ended up? Maybe they would have called the police, had her arrested, or even institutionalized. A great mind like hers? What a fucking tragedy that would be. Like Claudel sequestered just as she hit her prime. Not on my watch. At least, not if there was anything I could do about it. Dr. Wong tried to normalize things at dinner. She introduced us, told Dr. Frank about the work I'd been doing. Over a comforting meal of burgers and ciders, her brown face began to recede back to its normal shade, and her chestnut brown hair, just a touch or two lighter than mine, resumed its usual relaxed position as it gradually dried and fell away from her face. But she still didn't utter a single word. After dinner, we caravanned in 2 cars to my apartment. The lab had furnished me with a generous stipend that allowed for comfortable housing. I'd already paid through the next month, since I was still debating my next move. Honestly, hanging around in the hopes FFI would take me on in a more permanent capacity. And so it was that I took care of Dr. Frank, my superior and my idol, for the next few days as she slept on my pull-out sofa. I tried to offer her my bed, but she refused with a vigorous shake of her head. I fed her Shelley Bao and Neuromen I'd picked up earlier that day from a local dumpling house and offered her constant water and cocooned her in blankets in hope it would ease the chill, determined to rest in her bones. At times, I inquired about Dr. Frank's level of comfort or if she had finished a mug of tea or a bowl of soup I'd offered her. She just nodded or shook her head accordingly. After a few days, the initial wildness in her fell away little by little, and she finally began to look like the version of her I was most familiar with from afar. On those rare occasions when she would breeze through the lab with prospective donors, or from the many videos I watched of the talks she gave around the world. The warmth returned to her cheeks. After asking for her permission, I touched her skin to check for a fever or prolonged chills. I was pleased its temperature no longer made me recoil inwardly in shock. On the 5th day, she finally spoke for the first time since Dr. Wong had silenced her panic-stricken cries. I was so eager to talk to her, but also somewhat hesitant to ask what it was that had transformed her into such a frenzied, distressed creature, that initially I only viewed her from my own obsessively inquisitive lens. After all, this was my chance to ask the person I admired most in the world anything I wanted. When would I get that exposure to an expert like Dr. Frank again? I asked about her research, and she seemed relieved for the opportunity to speak about it. After so many days of absolute silence, I was struck by the smooth eloquence with which she spoke and moved by how forthcoming she was with her ideas and research, what led her to her field of study, how she developed her game-changing hypothesis. I, on the other hand, became so starstruck, I could barely get words out fast enough as I tried to shove 50 words out at once from my awkwardly small mouth. Inadvertently, my sentences were accompanied by an agitated stutter. Wasai! She smiled gracefully as I stumbled over myself in excitement and fervor, responding as though I were her colleague and not an awkward fan geeking out. It felt like a dream come true, and yet at times it felt selfish and narcissistic to only consider what knowledge I could gain from someone so clearly in pain. She asked me about my own studies, and even though Dr. Wong had told her all of this when we first met, I didn't mind refreshing her memory. She seemed particularly intrigued by my being a runaway teen, an aspect of my story not even Dr. Wong knew, and one I didn't anticipate revealing so quickly. She was very curious to hear how I transitioned from the streets to such a prestigious position. I could tell it sparked something in her that related to whatever she currently grappled with, but I tried not to pry. Eventually, though, leaning towards me with an elbow on each knee, Dr. Frank forced my hand. You've been very sweet not to meddle in my affairs, especially given how generous you were to offer your wonderful home as my hiding place. But I can tell you're dying to know what's behind my peculiar behavior and exactly what I'm hiding from. I'm no fool. I know everyone in the lab is talking about me. Scientists try to act above such pettiness, but they gossip just as much as the next person. Maybe even more, she smiled, looking directly into my eyes with a candor I hadn't seen her express thus far. Gave me a little wink. The wind I held tight inside me collapsed as though I'd been holding my breath for days. I cleared my throat, unsure of how to respond. Yeah, well, I mean, of course I've heard little whispers here and there, but I just try to focus on my work and move on. But please, if you want to talk about what's going on for you, I'm happy to listen. I placed my hand on her knee in a somewhat forced attempt to offer compassion instead of voyeurism. She smiled. I do want to tell you my story, if for nothing more than to warn you. For I feel there is something in our stories, what I can intimate of yours at this point anyway, that unites each to each. Maybe the only good that can come of what happened to me is its potential to help another, like you. I can see that danger's twinkle in your eye already. It would mean something to me if I could at least save a fellow scientist and an inquisitive mind like yours from a future of torment. I giggled out of recognition. This is no laughing matter. But, oh, I remember what it was to be you. So young, headstrong, the world at your fingers. You don't know what I mean yet, but I think you'll see once I tell you all there is to say. I was puzzled by her introduction to whatever she was preparing to tell me. It was ominous, but like she said, I was young, naive, and too full of the elixir of ambition to even guess what she was hinting at. Now it was her turn to reach towards me. Her eyes returned to a bit of their earlier wildness as she tried to implore me to receive what she would divulge. I also felt that with the intensity of her gaze, she was testing me as well, trying to see if I could handle it. I did my best to return her gaze, but I was so enthralled by her that it was hard to focus once I felt the skin of her hand. A soft tingle of electricity shot up my arm, but I tried to appear as nonchalant and earnest as possible. I couldn't help but want it to mean something, that I was special enough to be touched, that only I was privileged enough to hear her story. After Ma, after Ba, after Ko, it was hard not to find myself drawn to her, if only because someone as important as she seemed drawn to me. It didn't occur to me not to get ahead of myself, to even wait to hear what she had to tell me before riding that train of hope and anticipation. I knew what I wanted it to mean. Rookie mistake. Dr. Frank excused herself and left the room. My heart dropped to my stomach as I assumed I'd ruined everything with my insecurities and pride. My one chance to connect with my idol. Before I could sink too far into my own self-shaming, she returned with an old tape recorder and a box of unused cassettes, still protected in their shrink wrap. I want to tell you the entire story. If anything happens to me, promise me that you will share my story with the world. I nodded solemnly. That's when she began to tell me what happened to her, a story so akin to my own, and yet which took turns so frighteningly separate that I feel I have no other recourse but to share it. Besides, there's no way to tell my story without telling hers too. Just as she did all those years ago, now I too feel compelled to share it, in hopes it will keep others from the choices that took me down my own foreboding path. Perhaps communication with another is the only thing we have to keep us from the darker depths of fate. Thank you. Thank you so much. I haven't read this part yet. That was a new excerpt that I've read aloud, so I'm super excited.
Oh, wow. That was amazing.
Yeah, you could have kept reading. We were good. You could have kept it.
You could have kept an audiobook. We'll just turn it into an audiobook.
Right, that's what I was thinking. I was like, they just need to continue reading. This whole episode could just be the audiobook version. So I'm going to start us off. So, Addie, I'd like to always start off with the title of the work. It is an invitation and a window to what readers will experience when reading the book. Please share with us how you chose Unwieldy Creatures as the title of this book.
So initially, for a very short time, I had actually titled it Ashland, which was named after the creature, and I was feeling very cute and sort of, it was like a little nugget. And then obviously, like people who read the book, agents and other people were like, you really need a title that's going to clearly connect to this theme of Frankenstein. And so I knew that I wanted creatures or creature to be in the title. And then honestly, unwieldy was not only a word I just naturally used throughout the book, but what I thought could connect all of the characters in the book, that they're all struggling with a kind of like stability, instability in their lives for very different reasons. And it was really important to me to humanize the creature, that the creature represents all of us, and they all are unwieldy. We all are, right? Like all of us. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think this segues into the next question so nicely. So one of my favorite lines from the text, which is at the very beginning, sometimes the ground tells you who you are. Can you share with us a little bit about your protagonists? Who are they and what journey do they take in the text?
So our protagonist, who largely goes by the name Plum, is a queer Taiwanese. She starts actually out as a ceramicist, and she ultimately makes her way to becoming an intern at Dr. Frank's lab, and she has a white abandoning mother. She has an abusive, difficult, complicated Taiwanese father, and so she initially, she spends some time on the streets, which ends up connecting her to the creature story as well, largely because she doesn't feel that her father is going to understand her as a queer person. But I would say that she is different than Dr. Frank because she's just more thoughtful about the choices she's making and about the type of life. I mean, she still sort of falls into her own path in many ways, but I think she thinks more deeply about her place in the mechanism of all of that, and so her end is not the same end as Dr. Frank. The other thing I do want to say about Plum is that in the original Frankenstein, we have Captain Walton, who comes upon Victor near the end of the story, and he sort of disappears very early on in the original novel. And I always felt like, why? Like, what? Why is, I understand that he was an engine to do the story within a story within a story, but it always bothered me that Mary Shelley just kind of like left him and never came back. And so I really wanted my narrator to be threaded throughout the book. And early on, I thought it would be really kind of exciting and interesting for the narrator to actually be part of the entire story rather than only providing a situation where Victor could tell his story. Yeah.
I think that Victor does, like, the character does leave in Frankenstein, but let's just put this on Mary Shelley's husband, because remember, he did edit it.
Yeah.
So I'm sensing like a little jealousy, like, why are you talking about these dudes? Yo, strike, he's out. Let's just get to the crust of the biscuit. I'm just saying, I'm just throwing it out there. It's not gospel, but that's one of my thoughts. But I do want to jump in and ask a couple of questions because, horror. Yes. Unwieldy Creatures seems to be a book about love, discovery, and acceptance. Was it your intention for it to take baby steps into the horror genre, or did you initially conceptualize this book as something written in the horror genre because of the fact that it's a retelling of Frankenstein?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think that Frankenstein is a really interesting novel because I don't necessarily consider the actual text horror. I don't think it operates the way that classic horror or horror of that time does. But when it got taken up and adapted into a gajillion things, I think that those adaptations then really re-emphasize the sort of like horrific nature of certainly like there was like the creature being sort of this hideous reflection of Victor's narcissism, but I don't really see it as horror, and I don't really see Unwieldy. I mean, I'm happy to put the book wherever people are going to read it, and I think horror fans are really interested in Frankenstein from that sort of like classic Hollywood, horror. But I did not relate to it in the ways that I relate to horror. I related to it as in the way that Shelley kind of really exposes these deeper aspects of our humanity. So yeah, so that's a really good question. So yeah, so for me, it's really Frankenstein, and then I kind of like built around it. Yeah.
Well, it segues into like the next question I want to ask, because this seems truer to the original version of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley than any movie or other representation that I've seen. Props to you. Good. Was it your intent to inspire hope at the end of Unwieldy Creatures, or was this more of a book about man's creation of a creature using science and the consequences?
So thank you for that compliment, because I did write this a little bit for Frankenstein stands. I wanted them to feel, because I think there's so many juicy narratives and sub narratives in the novel that never get addressed in literally any adaptation or retelling. So that was a very intentional thing that I was doing. But I think that personally, I feel it would be somewhat irresponsible to write a Frankenstein retelling and end it in the same way that the original ended. Because if we're thinking about the way that the other is represented in today's culture, any sort of underrepresented or marginalized person, I do not feel comfortable ending it in the tragedy that Frankenstein is. I mean, I think that what Mary Shelley was doing was like, all right, men, y'all think y'all can do everything. I'm going to literally put you in a scenario where I'm going to give you the power to do what women have been doing, you know, cis women at that time, and see how y'all handle it, and everything is going to be terrible. So I think like what she was doing was really important, you know, for that particular cultural moment. But I think in this cultural moment, I do not think that's the way to go. And we have plenty of plenty of tragic stories of underrepresented and marginalized communities. And I don't think we need any more of them. And so, yeah, so there are a couple things I wanted to do in the ending. I wanted Dr. Frank to have to deal with her choices. And I wanted there to be some redemption for her creature that is not in the original. So those were two things that were really important to me.
And it made me ugly cry. Okay, I was like,
oh my god!
It not like the pretty like, are you okay, mom? No, it was just like, oh my god, I can't wait to break it.
Oh, that touches me so much. That makes me so happy. I mean, I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I'm also kind of glad that you did.
Hey, it shows that you did your job well. So, in moving forward with that, your book explores the experience of multiple marginalized communities, including those with special needs and different abilities, or as I like to say, genetically enhanced. What was your process in terms of writing about these communities in your text? And did you have to do research or collaborate with others to write about these types of experiences? I know that I was like a smidgen small part of that process.
Yeah, no, which I'm really super appreciative of. I think that I felt there had, you can't really do, I mean, I guess you could, but I think it would be hard to pull off. You can't really do what the original Frankenstein did, because we have too much realism now. You know, there was a way that she was able to do it that I think if you tried to do it now, like people would just laugh at it. And so I was trying to come up with some sort of figurative embodiment of the creature that would not be super realistic, but would also not be so fantastical that you wouldn't take it seriously. So there is a public figure that the creature is based on that I've actually not brought up in any interview yet, which is Andre the Giant.
That's what.
Oh!
Because I knew. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. I get excited like this. You guys are doing this. But I was just like, I'm feeling Andre the Giant here, but I'm not saying anything because Andre the Giant had the same thing. So sadly, I was picturing Andre the Giant in the book, and I'm just like, why would she do that to Andre? Do nothing to nobody. But I understand totally where it was going. I knew that.
Okay, so it's funny because Lisa Peakerman and I had kind of a funny conversation about it, because we both deeply love The Princess Bride, and so I was like, well, you know, there's a connection to Princess Bride in this book. So the reason that so there are a couple of reasons for sort of using Andre the Giant. One is that he was celebrated, but he faced a lot of, not only health issues, but just a lot of issues around his condition. And it has always, and always really struck me. I mean, I'm late Gen X, so, he was definitely a big part of like my childhood. But I also felt like I needed there to be something that was going to make the creature physically intimidating in the way that the creature is in the original Frankenstein. I did talk to scientists in terms of how that would genetically kind of come about. I don't want to give too much away, but there's something that somehow that happens without Dr. Frank realizing it initially. And then, then Ash, grows up in the woods, and I had to come up with a way that Dia could not continue to be cared for by Pine. And so I sort of focused on size. So that was, but I was like trying to think of what would be like sort of the scientific underpinning around that. So that's why Ash lives with a form of gigantism, but it's still figurative. I don't want it to be super serious. Now, in terms of like who else I collaborated with, I've had a relationship to the disability community in very different ways for a long time. So I definitely was very intentional and tried to be as thoughtful as possible. And I did show it to a number of different people that live with visible and invisible disabilities. And for me though, that the real through line about the creature is that regardless of the creature's physicality, this creature does receive love in their life, right? And so that for me is the distinction for this creature versus Mary Shelley's creature, who does not ever get that opportunity. And we end the novel not totally sure what is the creature's fate. I mean, many people think that the creature dies, but I think like it's left open-ended. But certainly the creature does not have any sort of experience of anyone having compassion, sympathy, or love for him in the original. So I wanted to complicate that a little bit. So it was, I definitely think it was the aspect of the book that I was most concerned about, because I knew, it was the thing that needed to be done the most delicately and the most thoughtfulness behind it. So so thank you.
Okay, I do add one thing.
Yeah.
The science, when I was reading it, seemed like it would have worked. I'm like, this, if this happens, then I'm done. Like, I'm just like, she's got this and this, and then what happened. But it was just like, I was so there and I understood it, because normally when you see science in books, or when I see science like that, I'm just like, no, I'm going to skip these couple of pages and pray that this doesn't come back up. But the science works. I was just super impressed with that too.
Thank you. So there's two sciences that are happening. One, the one about being able to, create an embryo without sperm. I made that up and then discovered that it was a real thing. So that's basically how that happened. And then the other one about what would have to happen in order for a person to be born with this condition. I did talk to a friend who had a background in biology, and she sort of helped me sort of work that out a little bit. So it was but I'm actually super excited to hear that, because you never know, especially when you're not a scientist. Even if you do research, you always worry if you're going to be one of those people that they read it and they like roll their eyes like, get out of here, that's never gonna happen. So I'm glad to hear that.
It worked for me. You did it. You did it, sis. I'm so proud. Okay, I'm done, Nicole.
Oh gosh. Yay! I take the baton. And my questions are going back into like you as a creative. So The text is multilingual, which I absolutely love. Given its, and I'm an academic, so I made up a word, and Dr. Addie Tsai is an academic as well. So hope you appreciate this. Given its multilinguality, who is your ideal reader, and what journey would you like for them to experience as they read the text?
So I think that my ideal readers is split into two main parties. One, of course, would be people who love Frankenstein, know it intimately, have studied it or taught it, who really know what I'm working with and how I'm kind of changing each part of the original story. And then, but then aside from that, like in terms of just the heart of the book, honestly, the people who are represented in the book, so queer, biracial, Asian people, I'm always writing for them, because I very rarely see myself represented in this particular way in the world. And so, that's why I write. I write the books that I want to read, but also that I want to connect with people who are like me. And, that's often the way that I find them. So in terms of the multilinguality, which I love that term, taking it.
Yes.
I also wanted to represent different ways that these characters relate to language. And people have asked me, like, why is there the Mandarin and Chinese characters as well as the pinyin, which is the English spelling system? And I'm like, well, Plum is Taiwanese American, so she would most likely be thinking in pinyin, but I still wanted to represent the actual Chinese characters. But also I want more of that in the world, and I want to. I do think that Frankenstein in general is, it's a book about creation. It's a book about creativity. It's a book about language. We get to see the creature, for example. I think one of the most beautiful parts of the original Frankenstein is when we see the creature find language, and so, so I wanted to represent some of that. And also, maybe I want to make white people a little uncomfortable.
Why not?
Why not? Exactly.
I mean, all that, it's all there. I could have not translated it, but I was like, I should say also that I am not fluent. So, some of those words I know, some of them I have to look up. So I did have a Mandarin and pinyin editor who looked over it, and they were amazing also because they know some like cultural history behind certain things where they're like, they wouldn't say this, they would say it this way. The Chinese restaurant, the dumpling house, we like went back and forth because they were like, they would never name the restaurant this.
Oh, wow.
So it was really interesting. Yeah. But what's interesting about it is that even though I'm not fluent, I've been surrounded by people speaking Mandarin my whole life. So even when I don't understand the words, it still feels like home to me. It's like this very kind of complicated thing. So I wanted to represent that a little bit in Plum's world. And then I want to say something about the Indonesian gender categories. So there's this particular region in Indonesia, the Sulawesi region, who has names for 5 different gender categories. And even though this is a very specific region and not the region that Dr. Frank or her mother are from, I think that for queer and trans people, they are often trying to find the language to describe themselves. And sometimes they have to find they have to use innovative ways to find that. And so I wanted to also represent that sort of queer naming that happens in the world in the book from a like non-white perspective.
Yeah. And thank you for mentioning the act of translating and not translating, because I feel like a lot of times for people who are not of that experience, we need to be able to just watch a snapshot in the life as opposed to something always being adapted for us. I'm like, things can be meant for us, but sometimes we need to take a step back and be like, okay, we have the privilege of being invited into this world, as opposed to, oh, we're going to impose a world. And speaking of, I didn't think I would put a plug on something else, but I recently watched the series Mo on Netflix, which I think is also set in Texas. And it's about a Palestinian family, Mo Amer, the comedian, when they were refugees and moved to Texas. And there were these beautiful moments where there were like 3 or 4 languages spoken, no like subtitles at all. And I was like, if you really take the moment and not self-impose your experience on it, you got it, and you didn't need the help of the subtitles. And I love the moments where we just be and we just watch, as opposed to having that tour guide experience holding our hands and like, no, we don't need that at all sometimes.
Well, I do want to add, I find it fascinating that we as Americans have to label everything, right?
Yes.
So I watched on Netflix, but I wasn't watching with Nicole. But I watched the Manny, I can't think of his name, the football player with the girlfriend that wasn't real.
Yes.
Yeah, and they were talking about in American Samoa, they have 3 sexes. So it's like man, woman, and then it's kind of like this third sex is like whatever it is that you want to be. And then I've heard about this being in India and, and like all other cultures. So, but not, which is to say that they're not labeling it as such. It's more accepting everywhere else than here. So when we are invited into a world like this, I do appreciate it because that like I didn't know that I can take forward with me onto my next journey. But I just think that it's really fascinating, the way that you broke down the different ways and how Dia was used in the book. I just loved it. I felt, and all the food, I was hungry. Like, you owe me a meal for reading this book. Because I was like, I would want to go to a restaurant, but I would not know what to order. Well,
we're gonna have to do it. Yeah.
In DC, sis, come see me. I got you. But I wanted to add that many other cultures have this whole other label, but it's not really like bad. It's like a person without a sex. Like, I know in India they have it, Pakistan, I think they have it, and we are the only culture that we have to have those labels, which is very annoying. It's just for a person like myself, I'm just like, you are a person, you are who you are, and that's what matters the most. It doesn't matter what you are, but it's just what's inside of you that counts. And that was my TED Talk. Thank you.
Yes. So typically I hold questions until the end, but there was a question that just came in that's very relevant. For those of you who are joining us from either YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, please feel free to post in the comment section your questions and we'll hold them to the end. But this one is kind of relevant. So we did get a question in. I'm thinking it's to Addie. Did you take classes with QM Kim?
No, I don't. Can you spell that?
So it's the initial Q, the initial M, and then the last name Kim.
No. But now I'm intrigued.
Yes. So we're gonna have to do some research. So can you talk about your writing journey, especially given that you also are in dance? How did you discover the craft of writing, and what was the formative experience that informs this particular creative practice?
So, funny enough, fiction is the only genre of writing that I've had literally no formal training in.
Oh.
And it's like the only one that I can seem to get books taken for, which is, I think there's probably something there. But speaking of horror, I did first start writing we didn't call it fanfic back then. There wasn't that word for it, but really bad fanfic of Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles.
I'm here for it. I'm here for it. I'm here for it. If you got a Lestat story, forward it. Send it to me. I am here for it. Oh my God.
And I've been thinking about like returning to vampire stories. But yeah, so that was really where I started. I mean, I've always written poems since I was a child, and I was so there are a couple of really really formative moments in my writing journey. One, when I was a sophomore in high school and we were told to write a poem that didn't rhyme, and I'd never heard of it before, and I was like, what are you talking about? This is not a thing. You know, I need to preface everything that for the younger audience members, that this is before the internet. There's no place to research things. Okay, so when you if you didn't know a thing existed, it did not exist.
It didn't exist.
Yeah. So I wrote about some childhood trauma in that poem just because it had kind of come up in my life, and it was this really revelatory experience for me. And that's when I started writing poetry. And then when I was in my undergrad, my father wanted me to major in business, and I started failing accounting. So then I said I wanted to major in English. Didn't know creative writing was really a thing. And he said, well, I'll let you do journalism. And I had an elective. And so I decided to take creative writing. I was 18, and it absolutely changed my life. I changed my major, didn't tell him. He just got the paperwork. We never spoke of it. He just got the work in the mail. And then so I fell in love with poetry. And at that time, it just really helped me sort out my emotional life. And there was a control to it that was very comforting to me. And got my master's in creative writing and poetry. But this was in the early 2000s. The internet was a baby. And I just did not, I just felt very disillusioned by the way that poetry was done at that time. We had less than 5 online journals. It was a very tiny little camp, and I felt like you had to be in this very specific aesthetic framework to be in those camps. And so I just started. My poems got bigger, and then they turned into lyric essays, and then I started writing nonfiction. And I wrote a memoir, and it was supposed to get published. It had a contract, but the press sort of fell under right before it was supposed to get published. And I thought to myself, well, what do I want to do? Who do I really want to impact? And I was a little worried about what it means to put a memoir out there. I was really young. I was in my mid to late 20s. And so I was reading a lot of young adult, not fiction. And so I decided it was an experiment. I never expected to publish it. I wrote it in a month. I was like, I'm just going to write this memoir into a young adult novel. And that's Dear Twin. Frankenstein just sort of is something I've been obsessed with since I was a teenager. And with my ex, who I divorced at the beginning of the pandemic, we were about to go through IVF. And I was thinking oh, this is actually a perfect landscape to do a retelling of Frankenstein, because it's so accessible now. So many people are starting to do IVF, and our technology is only getting more and more complicated. And I always wanted to put Frankenstein in a non-white, non-cis environment, and to see what would happen. What would happen if Frankenstein was a woman? What would happen if we had, if the whiteness in the book was used intentionally rather than assumed, that sort of thing. In terms of so the other thing I want to say about my writing journey in relationship to dance is that I wanted to be a dancer first. But if you don't grow up the way some people grow up, you can't afford it, and writing is free. So
dance. What do you want to do?
Yeah. So so I've always been in love with dance, but I never really got the opportunity to really pursue it in the way that people can. And so I did learn tango. Tango is the one thing that I learned the most. I did that for a number of years. And I returned to Frankenstein in my 20s because I went through a breakup, and I started I started rereading Frankenstein, like self-help. I was like, okay, how do I get away from these narcissists that I'm dating?
Oh, wow.
I'm going to reread Frankenstein. And so I was rereading it in this like very psychoanalytic way, like trying to understand this narcissism. And as I was reading it, I thought, you know, this would make a really interesting dance adaptation. And so I pitched cold this idea of doing a dance adaptation of Frankenstein. And I had done all this research. So I knew all of these facts about how the book was conceived around Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley and all this sort of like you know, the backstories of their really complex relationship. And so there's this choreographer that was in the town that I was living in at the time in Houston, who had done a lot of literary sort of choreography. So I knew that he would probably be up for it. So he and I, you know, made a Frankenstein together. And that was the moment that I was like, oh, well, I never got to be this professional dancer, but now I can participate dance in other ways. And that's what led me to the PhD. But I wrote my dissertation about white men dancing in pop culture. So
wow.
Yeah, so basically, like not to go too far off track, but like my very quick elevator pitch was I wanted to write a dissertation that I felt non-dancers would read, because dance is this very weird discipline where, you know, people read film studies, you know, people read cultural studies, but dance is always like this tiny, you know, intimate community. And I wanted to write about dance and pop culture. So I wrote about a trope that I perceive in pop culture. I sort of give Eddie Murphy credit for it. Not everyone thinks some people don't like that I give him credit, but I am. I'm giving him credit for it. That he sort of he's like one of the earliest people to say that you know, that straight white men can't dance. And I felt that trope coming out of the 80s surrounding the homophobia, but also like the AIDS hysteria of the 80s, that it has like persisted through time and is still being used, this idea that straight white men either can't dance or won't dance, and that's used to affirm their masculinity. And so that's basically that in a nutshell is my dissertation. Yeah.
So but what about Footloose? I'm sorry, Footloose? The movie?
Well, I think those are a little different. I look more at the places where like it's less like a dance film, but more like The Office, Friends.
Oh, wow.
You know, where they just happen to dance or not dance, and that there's always this kind of comic buffoon sort of. But the funny thing was, the reason I started writing about it was I was watching Colbert one night. And I was like, what is this thing that like he started dancing? But, you know, it's always supposed to be funny. Like whether they dance well or they dance badly, it's kind of this thing. So so I decided to look deeper into it. So I looked at men dancing or not dancing in film, television, and video from the 80s. I think Trump on SNL was probably one of the last people I wrote about.
She's invoking the devil, Nicole. She's invoking the devil.
Well, and one of the reasons I wrote about it was I was like, why are you giving him this platform to look less threatening? You know, that's the other thing that they do with it. So then they don't look as terrifying or as powerful or as violent. And I feel, I have lots of feelings about it. Yeah, but
so many feelings about it. And then this takes me, I think, into my next two questions. We have a couple more left before we wrap up this evening. So our environments and communities inform our creative practices, we're kind of talking about now. You grew up in Texas, which right now, and I think always creates a very unique cultural and political experience. How did this time impact and inform your approach to writing and also as an educator? And how do you see where you're based in the country now /defining or /informing your practice?
Oh, that is a big question. You know, it's always interesting to be from a marginalized community in the South, because a lot of us are there way more of us than people really want to talk about.
Right.
So I grew up, I was born and raised and lived in Houston until last month. And Houston is the most diverse city in the country. It's been that, like, number one. It's been that for a long time. It's something that people who've never been to Houston tried to fight me about, but it's true. And you will see it. Like, if you come to Houston, you will see it. Like, diversity is just like within the fabric of the city. You don't even, and that's something that I really benefited from. You don't even think about it. But at the same time, and this is part of the reason I left, you know, you're just tired. Texas is a huge, huge state. And the governor of Texas is, I think, only one could possibly beat him in terms of how harmful, how intentionally, deliberately, calculatingly harmful he is to many, many communities and many types of residents that live in Texas. And, I fought for a long time, but for me, I was just tired, and I was just ready not to fight so much. But Texas is a part of me. I really care about where it goes from here. I really hope that there are a lot of really amazing people there that are really fighting to change it. And, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin and Dallas are doing really great things. But the problem is Texas is gargantuan.
Right.
So, and a lot of it's rural, and so I don't know what they're going to do. It was really the political climate when I started this book and where it is now is kind of interesting, because when I started this book, I was really thinking about the abortion battles that were happening in Georgia.
Oh, wow.
Because I started writing it in the summer of 2019, and it comes out in the midst of something far worse than a single state. Right now, we're dealing with and now the three of us are talking, and officially abortion has just been made a felony in Texas. I think 3 days ago, this was sort of. So I really love, I love the South. I love a lot of things about the South. There's, it's a really rich, vibrant place to grow up. I also think you learn a lot about systemic racism, and there's a lot of things you sort of always know are going on that I think is actually helpful to see it rather than for it to be sort of hidden. But I would also say that, like, now I live in Richmond, Virginia, and it's the same stuff. It's just it's just packaged different. I feel like Baldwin was really eloquent about this, about the ways that people try to talk about the South and the North. He's like, it's the same. It's happening everywhere. And so I think that that's also been interesting, because I think when you grow up in a place like Texas, you sort of have this idealism. Oh, well, if I can get out of here, it's not going to be like this. And it is different, but it's not, right? Like, it's just, I don't know how else to describe it. So, but I do think that it informs the way that I work, in the sense that it's really important for me to fight. It's really important for me to speak out against injustices. It's important for me to, like, as an educator, decolonizing my syllabus. I always say that I decolonize my syllabus. I always say that I'm pro-Black, anti-racist. Those two things are equally important. Yeah, it's funny. Every time I've said that to academics, they're like, if you haven't heard this, then you need to do something about that. So I think it has, like, informed the kind of person that I want to be in the world and the kind of work that I want to write. And it would be great to have a big, huge book, but that's not what matters to me. What matters to me is writing a book that is really close to my values and that really connects me to the people that I want to be connected to. And so but it's an intense thing to come from, I think, from the South as a person of color and as a queer person. And Texas has always been complicated, but it is just getting, it's just, to me, it's getting very untenable. Every single, underrepresented community right now is fighting. Queer and trans people are fighting. Books are being banned.
I think you can
immigrants are being
that
challenged.
for, like everywhere, because Nora Roberts just donated $20,000, I want to say, to Library of Michigan, where they were having their books banned because they were LGBTQ plus.
Wow.
As I say, because I work for a library, I'm like, no one knows it all. We all need libraries to research and to do things. And I think that is the dumbest thing. It's like, if you don't like it, then just don't bother with it. If you don't want to read an LGBTQ plus book, don't take it away from everybody else because you think that it's bad for everyone. Let everyone decide what it is. It's almost like with this woman in Louisiana, and she's pregnant, okay? A woman of color, Black woman. And she has this baby inside of her that's dead. And they're like, you have to carry this baby to term, and then you have to deliver this baby. Now, she is just one woman. She's a Black woman. She's very well educated. She has connections. She's coming out and she's like, look, I can't get an abortion. My doctor told me that I can't get an abortion because it's illegal here. And then you have the representatives in Louisiana like, well, wait a minute. You can't, we're not going to do anything bad to you. Well, what about that 15-year-old girl that was raped by someone that has the same thing but doesn't have the same outreach? You just kind of, everything is questioning right now. And all I'm saying is I'm going to buy an island and I'm going to live there by myself. And you can visit, but I've had it with all of this. It's just too much. It's like, I feel like if you don't like it, you can't make it so that everyone else doesn't like it. You have to let people make up their own decisions. But
and speaking,
I'm sorry. And they don't care at all.
Yeah,
they don't care.
No, but they did backtrack on the Louisiana woman quickly because she had like a bunch of lawyers and stuff around her, and they were like, "Oh, wait a minute, sis, you can get that abortion. It's okay." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, you're saying it's okay for her, but what about the 15-year-old girl that's like in Alabama that has the same situation, and she doesn't have a mouthpiece or a lawyer or even money? She doesn't even have access to any of these things. So are you going to make it for her? You can't pick and choose. It has to be either yes or no. That's the end of it. So I'm done with these people. If you don't have, just stay out of my uterus, okay? Just stay out of it. You don't have one. You don't know what it's like. Stay out of it. Of course, if you want a uterus, you can have it, along with menstrual cramps, pain, and having babies, and all of this. I will gladly give you my stretch marks, everything. You can take it because my body after 3 kids is a wreck.
Oh Lord.
Attractive at all. So I'm like, you take it. Do what you will, and then you will learn. I always say, if we can get one important man, like in the White House, to have a menstrual cycle, women would get 2 weeks off a month. We could just get one man, just one man, and now it's like the universe. So I'm looking at maybe working some science that Addie has talked about, and going to the White House with a little. I'm gonna give you a uterus and some cramps. Let's see how you like that, buddy. Oh my God, the legislation would be passed tomorrow.
Tomorrow. I have several people that I need to do, and I have a list of several states that I need to go to. Be like, hey, Bremen, how you doing? Sticking with the needle, boom, see what happens. Yes, and going back to this. And one of the things I'm programming for Black Writers Read actually for Juneteenth, and if people are listening, if you can help, that'll be awesome. is I want to do something on the archive and libraries, and like how authors collaborate with history and collaborate with the archive and collaborate with the past on how to tell stories. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because of the banned books. It's because of curricula changing. It's because of this whole erasure. And I'm like, y'all, the fuck? It's like somebody is going through with a big eraser, and I'm like, why? Like, again, we're questioning power and authority. It's like it existed. So what are you guilty of to want to make this all go away?
Yeah, but even if you erase it, you can't erase it out of existence because it still happened.
Right.
Yep.
And trust me, there will always be a smart ass like myself standing there going, "No, hon, no,
Yes.
no, it ain't happen like that, Joe." Just no.
Well, how did we get all the things we've gotten? We've gotten them because somebody did that, right?
Right.
Somebody said this. I don't care if this has always been done. This is unacceptable, and they've pushed against it. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It's sad that we have had to take it that far, but at the same time, you are thankful for the one person that did it. The one person that just said, "You know what? No mas. I'm out. Nah. I'm not sitting in the back of the bus today. My feet hurt."
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Feet hurt. My back hurt.
Well, I'm going to sneak in. I'm going to drive to DC and sneak into your luggage so I can go to the island. And then what are you going to do?
Right, nothing.
You know what? So I got space. I'll have enough space. Princess Island is for sale for like $1.6 million. I've been trying to get like a bunch of people to donate some money. I think maybe I need to get like a Patreon or something, because I'm just like, yo, it's got electricity. It's got internet. It's got everything. And it's Prince. So it's purple. Let's go.
Yes. Let's just set it off and just rob some banks and just...
Hey,
I'm ready.
Just get out quickly. Just come on, help me out. I'm trying to buy this island. Like, it's Prince's thing, yo. What's up? Give me
yes.
Open the bottom drawer and give me the big bills. Don't give me that bait. I don't need that. I need big bills, and I need a plane, and I need to get out of here now.
I need a plane.
Find me. It'll be like the end of Shawshank Redemption. Find me.
Yes.
You can stay. Come with me.
Come with me.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
See
so
that?
I'm on my island. Addie, Nicole, y'all can come.
Yay! Lisa too. Susan and her partner can come too.
And
all
the
the cool
thing is,
kids.
people will laugh, but when it really happens, I'm going to be standing on that island with my flag going, no.
Yes!
Sovereign nation, get out of here. I'm not paying taxes. I'm my own person, y'all. I'm my own person.
My own person?
No fire festival for this island.
Oh, God, no. I will learn how to grow vegetables. I have a green thumb. I can do all this. I can do all the things because I believe I can. And with my daughter's motivation, Mom, you can do it. She just stands in the background and just goes, Mom, you can do it. You deserve all the things. And I'm like, yo, I got this, baby. We gonna grow us a cow, but I got us. I got this.
We gonna grow us a cow.
I got this because you believe in me. Thank you.
Yes. So, next question for Addie. And this is another profound, deep one. I'm the one that's always like, I'm all the heavy questions. Given intersecting marginalized identities, how do you render yourself, if at all, in your work, and why or why not?
So, I mean, I'm always in my work in one way or another. Dear Twin, my debut was autobiographical, so I was very much in that.
Wow.
But yeah, but I would say that Unwieldy Creatures is the most fictional thing that I've written. But I would say that I'm closest to Plum, probably, just in like general sentiment and personality. But you know, there are pieces of me throughout that kind of show up. there's a second part to that question.
The second part of the question is, I was actually about to manage the lovely comment section.
Oh,
yes. Why, and then why this particular choice in terms of how you show up in your work?
I don't know. I'm just a very, in terms of my connection to my work is always very personal. It comes from me, it flows through me. So I think for all of us, we end up in the work, whether we know it or not. But I think I have a clear idea of it. So, I think Plum sort of, so I always have a character that has a hard Asian father and a difficult white mother, because that's what I had. I don't see it anywhere. And, it had this huge impact on my life. And I think there's, that story is something I just am constantly working out in my life, and I question it sometimes, because I don't want white readers especially, to think that this is what all Asian fathers are, or that sort of thing. But it's also just the story of my life, so it just comes up whether I wanted to or not, probably. Yeah.
Well, okay, you kind of answered my question. So say, as a horror writer, I always insert myself into like a little bit of the story. You can figure it out, but usually it's the person that's doing all the killing. But going back to Unwieldy Creatures, do you see yourself reflected in the book as the scientist, the lover, or Dia, and why? But you said
well, Dia a little bit too, I think, because I would say Ash the creature, or Plum. Not as much the scientist, because I'm always trying to like make sure that I'm thinking about my ego, my projections, and so Dr. Frank is not really doing the work. But yeah, especially when I first read Frankenstein, I connected to it as a biracial person. Nobody was talking about biraciality when I read that book in the late 90s. And so I felt very connected to the creature as other. And so there was that part. I was really wrestling with being an identical twin. And so I really liked the duality of Frankenstein and the creature sort of circling and having this tension with one another.
Yeah.
And I always think of Victor as actually the abandoning mother of the creature. And so that was sort of the third aspect, which was that I grew up with this mother that was sort of in and out of my life. So the creature is the person I sympathized with the most, is the reason I fell in love with the book. So yeah, so I think the creature in Unwieldy Creatures and Plum are probably like the most sort of Addie that I put into them. And there's something else I was going to say. And then Ezra, who replaces Elizabeth, I really wanted to show how differently white men would behave in the situation that women were given in the original. So, so Ezra's.
So I have I have one more question. So there are so many categories for books in libraries, but if we just go with the basics here, like horror, fiction, nonfiction, science fiction, where would you see your bookshelf? Where would you want this book shelved, and why do you think it would belong there?
I would probably want it shelved in 3 different categories. One would be queer fiction, LGBTQ fiction. One would be Asian American fiction. And then I do think it is speculative or science fiction. But I prefer the first two just because those are the communities I'm trying to bring to the light the most. And so I want either those readers or people interested in those genres to find my book there. But I don't know, I love horror, so it's hard to say no to horror. And I also like the idea that somebody's gonna, maybe they would be unhappy, but they're gonna go to my book thinking it's going down a very sort of formulaic relationship to horror, and that it sort of surprises them in terms of how it deals with its subject matter.
There are elements of horror within it. I totally agree with. And then I think it could be classified as horror. The only science fiction part I would see would be the embryo, explaining it. But I could definitely see it in horror. I mean, and not only just like because it's scary, but the psychological aspect of it as well.
That's true. Yes, that's like where horror comes from. Yeah, I see that too.
Yeah, so you just have that whole like, I'm telling you, it was ugly crying. It was ugly crying. Like, oh my God, why y'all gonna treat this baby like this? Just I turned into my mother, and then it was just like, oh, y'all doing this baby wrong. It was just all the things. I'm like, 69-year-old Black woman, when I'm reading this, it's like, y'all doing this child wrong, and it's gonna come back onto you.
Yes.
I really wish I had an ugly cry selfie so I can just be like, read this book. Look, this is
yes.
I could just send you a picture of myself reading it again.
Oh gosh.
Snot running all down, like, oh, that's beautiful. Oh my God.
I mean, go for all the Viola Davis, you know what I'm saying?
Oh God! Crooked wig.
Like, she is the pinnacle of ugly cry, but still stunning.
Yes.
That gives me a good ugly cry, because you can like, you take it further, you start thinking about like humanity, and then you're just like, I can just cry over everything now that the tears have started flowing. I'm gonna think that dog that I saw that got kicked 3 days ago, the fact that this homeless guy was homeless, and I'm just like, he couldn't come in a library.
Dang.
It just segues on, and then you have a good cry, and then it's over, and then you go back to the book, and you're like, oh my God, I found the word I was crying. You just can't win.
Yes.
But I love a good ugly cry. I'm telling you, a good book, ugly cry. This is great. And I just wanted to run back to one thing you said about vampires, because I am down with vampires. You did a thing with Gwendolyn Christie the other day.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
And have you seen her or read her book?
The new one?
Yes.
Yes, I did read it, and it is. Have you read it?
I have started reading it. It's on my Twitter page, and I said I can't read it too fast because, once again, people and everything become non-important, and the book needs to take precedence. And then, I'm like, can you put a catheter in me? I need to read this book. I mean, it just turns into like really, but I started it, and I'm like, about halfway through it. I love it. I love the
cover. So let me see. Do I have it over? I had it over here once upon a time.
Oh,
yeah. So Gwendolyn Christie wrote this book called Reluctant Immortals, and she puts Dracula, Lucy from Dracula, Mina from Dracula, Jane Eyre, Bertha, and Rochester from Jane Eyre in the same universe in 1960s Hollywood, LA, and San Francisco.
Because it's 60, they said the next year was 69. So it was like 68.
Yeah. So it's like summer free love sort of era. And it's really clever and fun. And it's I can't wait to hear what you think about the end. It's true.
Okay. Right. Give me 2 weeks, girl. I'll be on it. I'll just email you. And then we'll bring Nicole in on this. with the vampires of the horror. You already opened the door by having me on the show, Nicole.
I know.
So now you in it to win it, sis.
Yes.
And speaking of horror, it's in the other room, but I have an essay in this anthology called "It Came from the Closet," which is an anthology of queer writers reflecting on on horror films. And I think you would really love it. It comes out early October.
Oh,
and,
wow.
Carmen Maria Machado and some other people are in it. I wrote about being a twin, so I wrote about dead ringers, but it's really
I love that movie. Oh my god.
Good. No, and I need some young people to watch because no one knows this movie anymore. Every time I bring, they've never even heard of it. And
about Streets of Fire, and people were like, "Wait, what?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Streets of Fire was like the thing in like the 80s. You don't know Streets of Fire? Everybody was in Streets of Fire. Willem Dafoe, everybody. Diane Lane, she was like 17.
Wow, I haven't heard of the movie. Wow.
Okay, you need to hang out with Tracy, Nicole.
I know.
Addie, we just have a movie night, and we're just going to bring Nicole over. Sit down, prop her eyes open, and make her watch 80s movies all night long. We have to get Streets of Fire, though. We can start with Dead Ringers, because David Cronenberg is absolutely insane. They had an exhibition on the tools that he made for the movie for the gynecologist doctors, because the woman had like 2 uteruses. And
oh my God, there's
saw those tools and I just clenched up inside my entire body. I'm like,
yeah,
do this.
I'm actually trying to get, so I had a designer, and I'm going to show you my jacket. I had a designer paint the cover of Unwieldy Creatures on the back of this jacket. And I'm trying to get, his name's Zachary Pod. He lives in Houston. He's a queer Asian designer, but I'm trying to get him to make me the Dead Ringers, the scrubs, the red scrubs. Do you remember with the thing? So that I can kind of promote the book, but also for fun. But I just wanted to show you.
I'll see my size. We can be.
So
I
love
it. So this is the, and he painted it. He painted it, hand painted it on.
No skills like this. I have no skills like this.
That is badass.
I love it. I love the red scrubs too. We can be twins. I'll come to you. You're in Richmond. That's like what, 3-4 hours away. So we can do this. We'll just walk.
Yeah, around. It's 2. It's nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just walk around like this on Halloween. We'll have my daughter, my niece and nephew. We'll just all make it a big old party. I mean, I've already been like, had people go like, I don't like the way that girl looks. Can you not have her come to my door for Halloween?
Yes!
I was dressed like the Purge. And I had,
oh my God.
With this upside down cross on my forehead. And I'm just swinging this baseball bat. And then this woman is just like telling my sister, ask her to stay further away. I just don't feel safe. And I'm just like, me? You know, I was like,
I mean, win, right? That means it's victory.
I was just like, yes!
Oh my gosh.
This is awesome. We're not going to get into what type of people, what I think we all know. But I was just very excited that I was doing it. And I don't think I can ever go back into certain neighborhoods in Maryland ever again because they made that face. Like, if you see this girl coming with these kids, lock it up. No more candy.
Oh gosh.
But I would love those red scrubs from Dead Ringers.
Right? I know. I'm excited about it.
Wow. And then I'm going to end with the question that we received earlier tonight in our feed, Q&A from someone who's viewing. So the question is, who is Frankenstein? Frankenstein, the creature or the creator?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yes.
So everyone gets it wrong. Everyone in the world. Frankenstein is the creator. Okay, so that's another thing I want to say about Unwieldy Creatures. So the creature in Mary Shelley's original, and this is why this conflation has happened across the pop culture representations, is that Mary Shelley never gave the creature a name. So he is referred to as the creature until, and this was actually one of the things that hooked me with the original, until the world turns on him. and he internalizes the projections of the world. And at that point, in the language itself, like in the book, Mary Shelley refers to the creature as the wretch, the ogre, the fiend, the daemon. So now he has become what society thinks of him. And so for me, it was really important to give my creature in my Frankenstein a name. And so I don't want to give away why the creature is named Ash, but it was a very specific choice that I made that deviates from Shelley's original. But that's why it always gets confused, because the creature has no name, and it becomes very difficult in these quick pop culture moments to refer to it. So like when people do it correctly, it's really Dr. Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. But I do think there's just kind of like catch-all word for Frankenstein being the whole world of it. And so yeah, but it's a good question. It's always how you know who knows Frankenstein and who doesn't. It's like who says Frankenstein is the scientist and who says Frankenstein is the monster or the creature. Yeah.
Yes.
Who read the book and who read the Cliff Notes?
Yep.
So I want to thank you so much, Addie and Tracy, for an amazing evening. Thank you so much to Susan, BookWoman, Levee Break Lit, and Lisa Pegram for curating such an amazing, amazing evening. For those who are joining us and who follow Black Writers Read, we'll be back live streaming on Saturday, September 10th at 3 p.m. with an author I will be announcing soon. I'll be going live on September 8th to talk through the upcoming season, and I'll be doing a lot of collaborating again with Levee Break Lit. So thank you so much for joining us for this evening. Congratulations, Addie, as Addie raises their hand like you're in school. Yes.
Can I say one more thing? I just want to offer a quote from Mary Shelley.
Yes.
Her birthday. My favorite quote from Mary Shelley is, I do not wish women to have power over men, but over themselves.
Yes, and it's such a perfect way to close. And thank you for taking the opportunity to celebrate Mary Shelley as well. Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. It's incredible.
Yes. So everyone have a great night.
Bye. This was
Bye. Thank you.